Hey guys, now in the meta there are a lot of tanks and monsters that you need an answer to. Sisters, Castigators, and Immolators, Grey Knights, Dreadnoughts, Mutant Vortex Beast, you name it. And in this video we'll take a look at some of the most efficient anti-tank combos in the Space Marine book. So without further ado, let's dive right in. First one I wanted to let you know about is the melee Dreadnoughts plus the Rapid Ingress combo. I don't see this used that often, and I'm actually surprised because this is one of the more accessible and inexpensive ways to get some proper anti-tank into your lists. Works really well with faster melee Dreadnoughts. You can obviously use the normal 6-inch moving Dreadnought as well, but this is not going to be that efficient because I'll explain later. Preferably you want something that can move 8 inches or more. There are no Dreadnoughts as far as I know now that move faster than 8 inches, so 8 inches it is. And also Advance and Charge is going to be very helpful if you have that capability in your detachment of choice, like Stormlands, Sons of Rust, Gladiators. Idea here is that melee Dreadnoughts are pretty inexpensive usually because GW knows that shooting is the thing to do in 10th edition, so they want us to have at least some incentive to buy these ones, so they usually run around at 140, 160 points mark, something like that. As the name suggests, they also fight very well in combat. Problem, as always, is actually getting into the fray, and that's where Rapid Ingress really helps. They become a delayed threat which you will get to use later than you would have otherwise if they were just running up the table. Usually you would charge earlier in this case than you would charge with Rapid Ingress, but not always. It depends on which army you're playing against. You'll be significantly closer to the intended target as soon as you land. So you will land in your opponent's movement phase, and what you want to do is you want to hide behind a ruin or be close to a ruin so to minimize the shooting your opponent can redirect the way of your Dreadnought. That is precisely why we want them to be fast, because if we are starting 9 inches away from our opponent, whichever unit that is going to be, and that may not necessarily be the unit that you want to charge, it just may be the unit that is performing the screening duty for your opponent or anything else, and you need to cross that distance. Hopefully you'll cross 8 inches and then some with your advance, and you want to be within some sort of normal charge range afterwards. And considering you're behind a ruin, chances are you're gonna need to do some moving around to get there. That's why slower Dreadnoughts like Redemptors or Venerable Dreadnoughts, they don't really work that well with this combination. From army composition standpoint, I would not do more than like 2 Dreadnoughts because we want to have enough things on the board to actually be active in turns 1 and 2. It's something that I think a lot of people make a mistake. They think that just by putting stuff into reserves or deep strike, you're making it more efficient, which is not always the case, because if you look at that from your opponent's perspective, the less stuff you have in turns 1 and 2 on the board means that stuff is not being utilized at all. So if you have something in your reserves and you will not use that in your opponent's turn or in your turn 1, and in your opponent's turn if you went second, there's also none of those units on the table, which means that your opponent has an easier time choosing their targets. They don't have to think that much about where to shoot. So reserves are something that you need to approach carefully and not just throw everything you can in there. Best candidates for this combination. The Death Company Dreadnought is number 1 because it has the +2 to charge against vehicles and monsters, so exactly the target that we want, meaning that if you're playing Gladius with the Death Company Dreadnought, you can put them in reserves, then run around 8 inches around the ruin, then advance, and then charge if you have monster or vehicle, and you would get +2 to that, so you'd be quite fast for those small little cute legs. Death Company Dreadnoughts obviously fight really well with those full rerolls to hit. They also are relatively survivable with a 2+ save, toughness 9, 8 wounds, and 6+ Fulminant Pain. Of course, we don't have OC on them unless there is a chaplain within 12 inches, but there's still a possibility to get that OC. Let's be honest, you don't really want the crazed, mad Dreadnought that sees horrors everywhere to be doing actions for you. Next is the Brutalis Dreadnought. This one is pretty good because you can take him in any chapter. You don't need to play Blood Angels or Space Wolves for that. And also it has great mortal wounds output and is generally a bit tougher for the wounds that it has. It's the more expensive option out of all 3, so 160 points now. Lastly, the Wolf and Dreadnought. I really like this one because he also moves 8 inches. He also has a 6+ feeling being like the Death Company Dreadnought, but he, in addition to that, has 4+ invulnerable save. So even if something can see him once you Rapid Ingress, it's pretty difficult to actually bring him down. And he also has the Mortal Wounds output on the charge like the Brutalis. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40K coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. Thank you. Next combo I wanted to talk about is the Jumpback Infantry plus the Grenade stratagem. And even though melee is far from being the tank killer that it was in 8th and 9th edition, where it was pretty much the best way to get rid of all those annoying hulls on the table, with the right combination of tools, we still can punch up into those higher toughnesses with our small 32mm base Marines. And the biggest benefits of these guys, why I think this combination is important to keep in mind, is the jump part of their name, because they can get around the very best thing that your opponent can do to protect their tanks against a not shooting-centric army, which is getting a screen in front of it. Jumpback guys can just fly over that and charge the tank anyways, which is very helpful. However, be aware of the heroic interventions, because there are sometimes nasty characters or units nearby, and if you just think about that tank thinking that, oh, it's my turn, nothing can happen, you can get caught out by the heroic intervention. Once you get there, however, there's still another problem, which is actually killing the damn thing. And there are a few things we usually need in this case. First is some sort of wounding modification. So it all depends, of course, on the volume of attacks, the damage you have, AP, etc. There are a bunch of jumpback units that we can use here, so I'm not going to go through every combination possible. But in general, my theory is that almost all of those normal jumpback melee units, they're not meant to be anti-tank without any kinds of buffs. For whatever reason, GW decided that this is going to be the case. So in most cases, what you really need is some sort of wounding modification like lethal hits, +1 to wound, anti-tank 4+, anything like that. And then in addition to that, you usually want Oath as well, and then it gets you over that threshold of average wounds dealt to the target being higher than the wounds characteristic. Of course, I'm talking mostly about cheaper Jumpback Infantry squads here, as you'll see in a second. I'm not talking about like a 10-man Death Company unit, which obviously is going to kill a tank probably without any buffs whatsoever, but that's 280 points. I'm mostly talking about a cheaper alternative. So in this case, we're going to discuss the 10-man Jumpback Intercessor unit, which is 160 points, or 5-man unit of Death Company, which is 140, so all around that 150-ish points mark. In most cases, Grenade is going to be a very critical part of this combination, because with the Grenade that deals about 3 mortal wounds to the target on average, you will in most cases actually get over that minimum damage. So for example, 10-man Jumpback Intercessor unit with 5 mortal wounds done on the charge, because hopefully you can get all 10 guys into engagement range of the tank, and then 3 mortal wounds you've done in the shooting phase with the grenade strat, so that's 8 mortal wounds already. Of course, sometimes you roll higher on the mortal wounds or lower on the mortal wounds, but that's about the average. You can probably subtract 1 damage from the charge, because in most situations you'll not actually be able to get everyone into engagement range, maybe like 8 or 9 guys, so that will be about 4 mortal wounds instead of 5. Then the whole unit is going to do about 7 to 8 wounds to the tank with +1 to wound in combat, and that's with Oath of Moment. That will do about 12-ish wounds to the Gladiator there. Another option is 5 Death Company, which would also do about 12 wounds if you give them +1 to wound and throw a grenade, which they also have the grenade keyword. We are obviously killing the tank with a very narrow margin, so you don't want to have that as your last option. You probably want to at least soften up the tank slightly before charging in with your squad. That will increase the chances of you actually finishing it off, and keep in mind that your opponent also might have some defensive stratagems available. So like if you're charging a Castigator and your sister's player is playing the Bringers of Flame, they will probably use the Armor of Contempt on that tank if they see that this is the only unit that is going to be fighting the tank and you have nothing else and the tank is on full health, and you're probably not killing the tank then. So keep in mind those defensive capabilities, and if they have them, add more damage so that you can actually guarantee killing the thing. Next is Azrael plus Hellblasters. So Hellblasters are the unit that I've been trying to feel good about the entirety of 10th edition. I really love the models. I've specifically made 15 very nice looking Hellblasters for my Death Watch, and I've not used them in 10th edition once. Reason being, their profile they have, which is strength 8, AP 3, damage 2 on the overcharge, 2 shots each, is something that lends itself pretty well into buffs, so it's easy to apply buffs to that, but they really need those buffs, otherwise they're not doing enough damage to the targets you really want them to. Surprisingly, even though you would think Hellblasters, almost any character can join them, right? And that's true, but most buffs are either melee or something that doesn't really help them. If you don't want to bend over backwards trying to get them to work, which is not something you want to do in your list, because that means that you're investing a lot of points into making something work that perhaps you should not have in the list in the first place. There's still a few ways you can actually make them work without investing too many points. So one of them is just playing them in the inner circle with any kind of Deathwing character attached to them. Of the all characters that there are available, the only one that actually buffs the Hellblasters well is Azrael, because he gives them 4+ invulnerable save and also sustain hits 1, which does make quite a significant difference. The other thing that he gives them is the Deathwing keyword, which helps you actually get the +1 to wound on when you're attacking enemy units on the vowed objectives. As soon as the Hellblasters get the +1 to wound and the full rerolls to hit, hopefully from Oath, if you are investing that for them, they actually become quite deadly. So in this case, it's an average of 18 wounds done to a normal standard Gladiator chassis tank, or 15 wounds if it's without the sustain hits 1 of that Azrael gives. Without Oath, it's 14 wounds and 11 wounds respectively. So not bad for this 10-man unit of Hellblasters, which are not that expensive now. 230 for a 10-man unit, 115 for 5-man. You can get the same damage boost by just including lieutenants, so if you're not playing inner circle, this is how you would use them. For this profile against a normal standard tank, which is higher toughness than your strength, lethal hits and +1 to wound are mathematically the same thing. Hellblasters do have one more problem though, which is transportation. They need extra range, or threat range in this case, because 24-inch range on their guns is just not enough. Yes, they can advance and shoot, which helps, but 24 inches plus D6 is still not a lot. Best transport for them is Repulsor, which is now cheaper, and you also get a very useful ability to jump back into the transport if they're charged. So if you're playing against a melee army, that is going to be extremely annoying for them. I mean extremely annoying. I've played against that as a melee army, and I can attest to that. Seen some people use them as a 5-man unit in an Impulsor, which then you can actually move advance Impulsor and then disembark the Hellblasters and shoot. Problem is then you are actually having to deal with 5-man units, and then Lieutenant, which you really need to punch up into the higher toughnesses, is not going to actually be very efficient. He only helps a 5-man squad instead of 2 5-man squads. All in all, Hellblasters are pretty good. They can be in a particular list with particular buffs. They can be a unit that is worth it for a competitive list, so they're not going to make the list worse by including them, and that is a good point for Hellblasters to be at, because they have been pretty bad for a long time in Warhammer. Next is one of my favorite combos out there, which is one of the cheapest ways you can actually get a skirmish unit to destroy a tank, a standard Gladiator style tank on average, which they cost 80 points plus 75 points, so 155 points for the two. Funny enough, the captain is more expensive here than the actual squad of 5 intercessors, but you'll see now in a second why. You would surely want an 80 points Impulsor with them, because that actually increases their threat range immensely. You add 3 inches to their movement. You also have the 12-inch move before that, or 12-inch move plus advance when you're staging the Impulsor, and then you move out 6, you move out 3 extra, and then you can advance, potentially charge if you have that ability in your detachment. Don't really need many buffs here, because the captain with his once per battle plus 3 attacks and devastating wounds that he has with the finest hour would do about 6.25 damage to a tank of this category with his sword. I've actually not tried the Power Fist, but something tells me that probably the Power Fist with one last attack would even do better than this. Yep, I've just checked. It's about 7.2 damage done by the Power Fist captain with the Finest Hour active to the Gladiator style tank. And the Sergeant with the Power Fist would do about 2.2 damage more and 3.25 damage from the chain swords, totaling adds 11.7 wounds to a Gladiator, or about 13 wounds if you are using the Power Fist captain, which you should. That's without any CPs spent, because we get a free +1 to wound whichever stratagem you use. It can be like Firestorm stratagem, Gladiator stratagem, doesn't really matter. +1 to wound in any shape or form. Which you can get for free with the captain, and also 4 reels to wound that you get on an objective. So obviously there are some changes to modifiers that can happen here. We're not using Oath, so this could help significantly to both the captain, because he can still roll once, and his unit as well. We're not using Grenade here at all, so you can seriously just add 3 wounds to this, or we can count that perhaps the squad had to advance to actually get within proper charge range, so they could not actually throw a grenade, and that's why we're not adding it here. Also, there is a possibility that the tank you're charging may not be on the objective, so that will significantly decrease the amount of damage you do. So perhaps you would need that extra grenade and the Oath to get to that 12 wounds mark. Also, if you're using something like Honor the Chapter and you have the Assault Doctrine on, which if you're advancing to charge and not throwing a grenade, it's very possible that you have the Assault Doctrine on to actually be able to charge, and then you would get extra AP, and that extra AP would again change the mathematics there. So I think 12 wounds is a pretty reliably achievable amount of damage you can do to a tank like this. Even without a perfect storm situation, being able to crack open a basic tank is a pretty cool result for a unit that costs 155 points, and I'm not including the points cost of the Impulsor here, because you will still get to use the Impulsor once you send out the Intercessors with the captain. You can just park it on an objective, you can do actions with it, you can shoot with the whatever guns it has, even though it's not much. Still, it's a whole extra hull that you have available. Not like 280 points plus Lemarty's combination, which you specifically send in one direction only, and you can only do one thing whilst it's doing that. And lastly, Eradicators plus the Fire Discipline, which is one of the craziest damage output combos in the Space Marine book. I'm sure you've been waiting for this one to be in #1 spot. And why it's so crazy is because you can combine 8 full reroll to hit, wound, and damage, melt shots, and some of them hit on 3, some of them hit on 4, so it doesn't really matter, with lethal hits and sustained hits 5+. And that hits some sort of criticality spot in the dice rolls and results in some obnoxious amounts of damage you can do, especially to units without invulnerable saves, because sometimes with my testing, sometimes you just, if you're say you're shooting at an Angron, for example, he can just boss all of his 4+ invulnerable saves and reroll the last fail, and then it doesn't matter that each of those damages would probably do like 5 or 6 damage to him. If you have not thrown him a bucket of dice, it's possible that he can roll all those invulnerable saves, but it doesn't happen often. In most cases, you will just completely obliterate, or totally obliterate, as the ability of the Eradicator says, the unit that you're shooting at. You will pay 275 points for this, which is 6 Eradicators plus Biologis with the Fire Discipline, and obviously, for those who didn't yet recognize, this is a combo specifically for the Gladiators detachment. It doesn't work in other detachments, unfortunately. It only works in this one. And as of yet, I don't know any other combo that can replicate something close to Biologis plus Eradicators plus Fire Discipline in other detachments. The critical hits to be 5+, you also need the Devastator Doctrine active, so you can either have that active for your army once per game or pay 1 CP to have it be active for this unit. Big problem of this combination is the 18-inch range on the meltas. As soon as your opponent learns that you have this combination in your army, and they probably know it already, they will hopefully keep it always on the other side of their tape measure, trying to make sure that you're never gonna get within 18 inches of their precious tanks. Of course, as you're playing with Gladiators and you want Devastator Doctrine, it means that you can actually advance and shoot with these guys, but 5-inch move plus d6 is still pretty short. It's very likely not going to get all of the models in the range, and every model you lose is going to impact the damage significantly. Two best ways to bypass that problem are a simple transport like the Impulsor, which now can actually fit 14 models, which is 7 models in Gravis. Some people before that used the Redeemer for this, but it feels like a waste because you're not using the assault ramp, and that is just not nice, especially now when the Redeemer is 285 points, so 95 points more expensive than the regular Repulsor. Or you can strat reserve them or deep strike them. Problem with strat reserves is if you are only limited to being within 6 inches of the edge, it's very often very possible that you will actually have a problem of, again, getting into range if your opponent is trying to push units up into your lines. So that's why deep striking them is the more guaranteed way to actually get to use them, because you're not be constrained to the battlefield edges. Or you can rapid ingress them, which is also a way to do it. However, then again, screens can be a problem. So let me know what you think about these top 5 anti-tank combos and which ones are you using in your list. I would love to hear that in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.